Pokémon Scarlet and Violet feel like the future of the series. Pokémon is a series that rarely takes great leaps between generations. Being the largest media property in human history, it can frankly do whatever it wants, and as such, has never felt like a series that's in desperate need to be in lockstep with the rest of the industry. It's difficult to comprehend that after 26 years of games, Pokémon Scarlet and Violet mark the first entries in the series that are truly open world, 2 decades after the genre dominated and saturated 3D games. And for some, simply making a classic Pokémon game in the traditional style would have been fine and still sold comically well, but that's not the case for Pokémon Scarlet and Violet. For the first time in an age, it feels like Game Freak is flexing its muscles with the main series. Where Pokémon Sword and Shield felt like an attempt to simply get a Pokémon game out on the new hardware and iterate later, Pokémon Scarlet and Violet deliver 3 games worth of ideas in one, with changes to a 25-year legacy that feels like the team is taking on board the often repeated idea that Pokémon doesn't change to heart. With a huge amount of content, a massive world to explore, and an extremely exciting post-game, details of which we can't mention, Pokémon Scarlet and Violet is bursting at the seams with ideas, even if it does feel like those ideas are a little ahead of the aging platform, the Nintendo Switch. Instead of one main story quest that largely involves collecting 8 gym badges and facing the Elite Four, Pokémon Scarlet and Violet have 3 main story paths. One path is dedicated to the traditional gym system, one has players chase down enormous Titan Pokémon, similar to Pokémon Legends Arceus' noble Pokémon, and the third has you take on hordes of 30 Pokémon while running through an enemy base. After an opening sequence establishing the world and a slightly too long explanation of the world at large, you're essentially let loose, free to pursue any of the 3 main quest lines in any order you choose. There does seem to be a light guide as to which order you choose to do them in, mainly based on the level of the wild Pokemon in that area, but if you wanted to and your team was good enough, you could do whatever you wanted right from the jump. Victory Road, the path during which you take on 8 gyms and then the Elite Four, is the most traditional of the various story modes. Each gym is still type specific, and thus very easy to steamroll should you have at least one Pokemon with a type advantage. The Path of Legends sees your character hunt down massive Pokemon that have been reportedly spotted across the map. These encounters, similar to the noble Pokemon, are enjoyable enough, but how these Pokemon feed into the overall story of the region is far more interesting. We'd have preferred for these hunts to be slightly more involved, as for more than one of them we simply entered the area and the Pokemon was standing in front of us, although 1 or 2 require a bit more effort. The third path sees players clear out bases across the map that are run by Team Star, the game's enemy team. Although enemy team is perhaps a bit strong, as outside of these events you rarely see the members out in the wild in the same numbers you'd see Team Rocket back in the day. What makes these battles unique is that instead of normal Pokemon battles, players send out 3 of their Pokemon to run around and automatically battle hordes of enemy Pokemon, with the aim of defeating 30 of them before the time expires. This is an interesting twist on the formula, and it's novel to get to run alongside 3 of your strongest Pokemon, but all of these battles are very easy and follow a similar formula. The advantage to having these 3 separate paths is that there always feels like there was something new to do to break up the experience. Want to explore the map? Go ahead, it's entirely open from the start. Want to take down gyms? Go for it. Want to try your luck against much higher level Pokemon trainer? You can find them out in the wild straight away. It's a very freeing experience, especially when the Pokemon series has been so guilty of hand-holding players far too much in the past, and not allowing them to get into situations where they're likely doomed to fail. But Pokemon Scarlet and Violet trust the player far more. Battling itself gets a new gimmick in terrestrializing, a mechanic which allows Pokemon to assume a new, completely different additional type, meaning that a water type such as Quaxly could theoretically adopt the type advantage and disadvantage of a fire type should it be found with that Terra type. This adds a new layer to the battle, and NPCs that you face on your journey do a good job of explaining how the mechanic can add depth to battle situations, and we really hope this mechanic doesn't go the way of Mega Evolving, Z-moves or Dynamaxing, wherein it's dropped after 1 generation. Another break in tradition is how the game treats the box legendary Pokemon, Miraidon or Caridon. Firstly, you're introduced to these Pokemon within the first hour, and you're given it shortly after. However, there is a twist. You can't actually battle with the legendary Pokemon at first, as it's been gravely wounded. However, you can use it as a mode of transport, as it becomes your bike, glider, dinghy and rock climbing apparatus. While this may unfortunately saddle Miraidon and Caridon as the legendary Pokemon that are treated with the least deference, their place in the overall story makes them feel like a much bigger part of the game, rather than the tendency for box legendaries to essentially be a bit of post-game fluff to round out your quest. However, as hinted at the start of this review, Scarlet and Violet feel too ambitious even for the Switch. Throughout our time with the games, we were truly disappointed by how they run on Nintendo Switch hardware. Pokemon games have never been technical masterpieces, but the limited scope of the open worlds has generally done a lot to hide that. To the game's credit, there are very few loading screens, only really in and out of the main central city, with the majority of the rest of the areas fully traversable and viewable from everywhere, but that's also what makes the technical flaws so obvious. The draw distance not only on the world but the Pokemon that show up in the wild is painfully short. The sense of scale of the world is lost when you see a distant piece of land flicker in and out of existence, entire towns disappear as you leave them. There are a lot of high vantage points across the region, and because of this it makes for painful viewing when you look across the vista of what appears to be an unfinished game. Worse, however, is how it affects the Pokemon that you're actually trying to catch. Pokemon being visible in the overworld feels like a change that must be set in stone going forward with the series. It adds immersion and it makes the Pokemon feel like they're real and part of the habitat, and it makes hunting them so much more exciting. However, in Pokémon Scarlet and Violet, standing even a short distance from the Pokemon will cause their model to revert to a low poly version, meaning round Pokemon are suddenly jagged octagons, and Pokemon's textures fall away to mush. Plenty of games use low poly models when the player is far enough away to save on rendering cost, but in this game it is so noticeable that it breaks the immersion. You can literally just go into an open field and walk back and forth the exact same distance to show where the game spawns the lower models. The game's frame rate is also extremely inconsistent, with some battles becoming more like slideshows and certain open world areas making the game feel like it's about to crash. Much like the low res Pokemon issue, there's also a distance where the Pokemon stops animating at their full frame rate, meaning Pokemon that flap their wings look like malfunctioning robots when you get some distance from them. The entire fantasy of Pokemon is that these are real creatures that live in the world alongside humans, and while the actual cast of new and returning Pokemon is an excellent mix, and our favourite class of new Pokemon since Ruby and Sapphire, these technical issues let the fantasy down. Pokemon Scarlet and Violet get so much completely right from a gameplay and story perspective, however the technical aspects of the game need that same love, especially as the series presumably moves on to the next generation of hardware by the time the next generation of Pokemon kicks off. Pokemon Scarlet and Violet feel like a proof of concept for the future of Pokemon. The series, now not far from 30 years of dominance, can't really go back to the quaint tiny towns and limited encounters of the past. Every decision Scarlet and Violet make are good ones. The huge expansion and changes to the single player campaign are great, the size of the world and the joy of exploration are the best in the series, and the new Pokemon and battle mechanics all sing. However, it's just impossible to shake the thought of how much better the game would feel if it was on more powerful hardware or simply ran acceptably on Nintendo Switch. We give Pokemon Scarlet and Violet 4 out of 5.